Imagine a dessert that's a cross between a sweet pound cake and a savory, cheesy, buttery cornbread in both flavor and texture. The Salvadorans have done just that. The Quesadilla Salvadoreña sweet cheese pound cake is near the sweetness and texture of a pound cake with a moist, sweet, buttery cheese flavor and near density of a cheesy cornbread. Cheese, dairy, sugar, and rice flour are the main ingredients in this uniquely flavored, lightly sweetened dessert. The quesadilla from El Salvador is a far cry from the Mexican quesadilla. The word quesadilla comes from the word queso, meaning cheese, and quesada, referring to a type of cake with cheese. A Mexican quesadilla is a flat tortilla folded and filled with savory meats, cheese, and veggies. The El Salvador version is totally a sweet cake, a pan dulce. The common ingredient in both is cheese, and more cheese. I'm excited to share my version of the Quesadilla Salvadoreña. For the ingredients, you'll need rice flour, baking powder, eggs, granulated sugar, vanilla, cojita cheese, crema mexicana, whole milk, butter, and sesame seeds. I'll provide substitutions along the way and in the recipe linked below in the description. This recipe comes together very quickly, so go ahead and preheat your oven to 375 degrees. And you're going to prepare a baking dish. So you're going to need a casserole dish, a 2-quart or 3-quart. I'm using a 2-quart, which is an 8 by 11.5, and a 3-quart is a 9 by 13. I like the little smaller version just because I like a little bit of a higher cake. And then you're going to take some butter and you're going to grease the pan. You want to grease it all around the sides and the bottom. You can use any kind of a greaser that you want, but butter is the main fat in this dish, and so I like to use the ingredient that's primarily in the dish. Then take a sheet of parchment paper and you're going to line the pan with the parchment paper. Just press it down so that it adheres to the butter. And to prevent cracks in our cake from the parchment paper, I like to take a pair of scissors and then cut down each corner and then allow the parchment paper flaps to overlap. Like so. So then just go back and smooth out the paper against the pan and it'll stick to the butter. It's like your adherence, it's like your glue. Okay, notice how smooth that is all around. Now we're going to grease the parchment paper just to ensure that that cake comes out of it easily. The butter will caramelize the cake and give it a nice dark colored exterior. All right, our pan is buttered and ready to go. In a large bowl, you're going to add 240 grams, which is a 1.5 cups of rice flour. Rice flour makes us gluten-free, which is great for us gluten-free need eaters here. And 7 grams, which is a 1/2 tablespoon of baking powder. And we're going to stir this together just until it's combined. Now, traditionally, this dish in El Salvador is made with rice flour, but you can also sub with corn flour, like a really fine corn flour, or a regular all-purpose flour, or even cake flour for that matter. So there are lots of ways you could make this cake using a lot of different grains that you like or that you can eat. Okay, and we're gonna set this aside for now. Go ahead and pull out the bowl that you're gonna mix your ingredients in, and I'm gonna be using my stand mixer, but a large bowl will be fine. And you need another bowl to put your egg whites in because we're gonna separate the egg yolks from the whites, and we're gonna use them both in the recipe, but we need them separated. So I like to use a separate bowl to separate them in case I accidentally get a yolk in my white, then I can go ahead and discard it and I don't ruin my recipe. And we're using 3 eggs here. I want to put the egg yolk in the dish we're going to start mixing everything in, and my egg white is going to go into a separate container so that we can whip those up separately. Okay, this is my last egg, so I have a really small bowl for the whites and a much bigger bowl for my yolks. Okay, then just set your whites aside. In the bowl of the stand mixer with our yolks, we're going to attach the paddle, and with the machine on low, we're going to add 1 cup, which is 200 grams of granulated sugar. Just slowly pour in your sugar. I have 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and beat on medium speed until the yolks are light and fluffy. The eggs are light and they're fluffy. The next ingredient we're going to add is 5 ounces, which is 142 grams, or 1.5 cups of cojita cheese. And we want it finely grated because we want it to melt into the rice flour when it cooks. Traditionally, queso duro blando, which is a hard white cheese, is used in El Salvador, but this is a good substitute. Parm is a good sub as well because all three of these cheeses are very salty. Cojita, I think, is a little bit of a softer cheese than Parm, so I prefer it over Parm, but a lot of recipes will tell you just to use Parm. And then just slowly add it to the machine. Okay, take a look at that texture. It's very grainy looking right now because of the cheese. The cheese will melt into the cake and you won't even see it once it's baked. In a small bowl, we're gonna add in 120 milliliters, which is a half a cup of crema. Look at the texture of this crema. It's pretty runny. So go ahead and measure out your 120 milliliters. Well, I'm using crema mexicana here. Crema salvadoreña is used in the El Salvador version, but Mexican crema is close enough. If you can't find either, just use French creme fraiche, which is a much milder tang than sour cream, which is what this is, a milder tang. But if you can't use any of these, use sour cream. Greek yogurt will work as well. And then to the crema, we're gonna add 125 milliliters, which is a half a cup of milk. And then give these a quick stir until they're combined. So between the whole milk and the crema mexicana, this is a fairly runny substance. That's our primary liquid in this dish. With the machine on low, we're gonna pour in about 1/4 of a cup of milk mixture at a time, stopping, allowing the mixer to blend it all well in with the egg at another 2 or 3 stages. You can scrape down the edges there. In a small bowl, add 114 grams, which is a half a cup or 1 stick of butter. We're going to put it in the microwave for 20 seconds to melt it. Stir in at another 5 seconds in increments until your butter is completely melted. Okay, our butter's just perfectly melted. So with the machine on low, you're going to slowly pour in the melted butter. While the mixture continues to run on low, we're going to slowly add in the rice flour and the baking powder mixture. Give the liquid ingredients time to absorb some of that flour before adding your next stage. All right, that's all the flour. Just mix until combined. Stop at least once and just do a quick scrape down of the bowl to make sure that all the flour gets mixed in. All right, look at that nice batter. It's got a little bit graininess looking to it because of the cheese. So the last thing we need to do is beat the egg whites. So to do that, let's put the batter back into the flour bowl that we had the flour in initially. We're gonna set the batter aside. Go ahead and clean while it dry out the stand mixer bowl so that we can whip our egg whites in. Back to our mixer bowl that's clean, we're gonna add those 3 egg whites that we set aside. You're gonna need your whisk attachment. You could also do this by hand by just using a regular whisk. We're gonna beat until the egg whites have tripled in size and have reached almost firm peaks. They'll be between that soft and stiff. Take a look. Our egg whites are flopping over and they're pretty soft, so we need to keep beating them till they're a little firmer. Notice that when I've turned it over, they're still jiggly. They don't look stiff. Even in the pan, they're flipping a little bit over at the top. So they do have a little bit of flip to them, but in some regards, they can almost hold their shape. So this is about the consistency that we want for this. If it's a little bit soft or a little bit more firm, it's okay. But you want to make sure that at least your egg whites are fluffed well. And that was really quick. That only took about a minute or so, if that. Okay, so the reason we fluff these egg whites is we want this cake to be like a pound cake or a tall cake, right? Whereas some recipes don't require it, but I like it because I like a softer cake. We're gonna take about half this mixture. We're gonna just fold it into our cake. We don't wanna stir it because we wanna keep this fluff to make sure that our cake keeps a height to it. Fold it in just by flipping the batter over the whites, turn it around, cut it in half, sort of flip it over, and we continue to do this until the white streaks are gone. So now we're gonna add the rest of our egg whites. And then we're gonna just fold in the remaining egg whites. These fluffy egg whites help to counteract and balance the heavy dairy that we have in here. So it just helps to have a higher, fluffier cake. Just go ahead and spoon it into our prepared buttered dish. Smooth out the top. Okay, that was pretty easy. The last thing that we do is sprinkle on some white sesame seeds. The sesame seeds add a little texture. They have actually add a little bit of a crunch to the top of the cake, which is nice. I enjoy the sesame seeds on this cake. You could put as many or as little as you like. This is tradition in El Salvador, but of course you could leave the sesame seeds off if you don't have them or you don't like them. Okay, there's our cake. You're gonna bake the cake for 30 to 40 minutes or until a toothpick is inserted into the center. It comes out clean. Your cake should be golden brown on the top and of course nice and crispy bottoms and sides as well. Our cake is hot out of the oven, so we just need to let it sit on a cooling rack and allow it to cool before we lift it out and cut into it. You may just give it about an hour or so just to cool enough so you can remove it from the pan. Okay, once your cake has cooled, you can actually now put it on either a cutting board or a serving platter. So all you have to do is just lift up the parchment edges, take a look at the corners there. It comes off very easily. And because we buttered everything, it's gonna come right off the paper. So I can just lift up the bread or the cake, which is what it really is, and just place it on my board. Let's take a look at the bottom. It's nice and brown. The top is nice and brown because there's beautiful sesame seeds in it. So you can slice this into preferred sizes. I think 12 is a good serving size out of this cake. That would get 4 rows down and then 3 across, and that'll give you 12 pretty equal pieces. They're definitely like squares. So take a look at that. That's a good size because it is a rich buttery cake. It's spongy, so it does have a lot of reminiscence of a pound cake. If you tear into it, it's got a little bit of a stretch to it. So it's got that yellowish, like the butter, because it is rich. You don't see any cheese in it because the cheese is all melted, which maybe that's why it has that little gluten look to it. The rice flour resembles more of a finely ground corn flour. So the cake has some height to it thanks to the baking powder and the whipped egg whites. It is moist and rich from all of the dairy. If you didn't know it was gluten-free, you probably wouldn't guess. So my house smells like sweet cheese right now. It's a cross between a bread and a cake. So it would make a nice breakfast or a nice dessert. Store the cake covered at room temperature up to 5 days. For longer storage, place slices in a sealed bag or container in the freezer for several months. The Quesadilla Salvadoreña is commonly eaten for breakfast or a snack since it's not overly sweet, but it is plenty sweet enough. Serve with a cup of coffee or Mexican hot chocolate and enjoy. Thanks for your support in watching, liking, and subscribing. Muchas gracias. Until next time, go bake the world.